Rockaways Productions presents The Casey Waters Show, episode 515, My Big Toe, by Thomas Campbell, Part 7. Hello, I'm your host, Casey Waters. Today, I will continue with The Rescue Agent. Here, I look at the nature of reality and consciousness and how it might relate to the imaginary territories. Then, it's on to My Big Toe by Thomas Campbell. Here, the author looks at the nature of reality and consciousness. This is a long book, about 800 pages. However, I'm finally nearing the end. Today's show will feature background footage from a couple of trails in the Swannanoa area of North Carolina, near Warren Wilson College. So, now let's continue with The Rescue Agent. And people in the distant past, when it was you and nature, and you had to know when the storm is coming, or you had to know where your loved ones are, even though you can't see them or communicate with them, and you don't know what their plans are, but somehow you have to know where they're at. And sometimes you do. At least that's my assumption. My assumption is for people in the distant past who didn't have much technology or no technology, who had to rely on nature and each other, well, when people got split apart, somehow they could find each other, maybe even in unfamiliar areas. This might not happen often, but I'm assuming it did happen occasionally, perhaps more often than statistically likely. That's my assumption. I have no evidence to back this up. It is an assumption of mine that people under isolated conditions have more psi phenomenon. But people with trauma, who have experienced lots of trauma in their lives, having more psi phenomenon, such as telepathy, has been documented. So what's this psi phenomenon? Well, it comes perhaps from non-physical matter reality. And in there might be the imaginary territories of thought. The east side and the west side. Well, the east side just loves to rescue. That's their favorite thing to do, perhaps. So they just sit there. I picture it being twilight, for that's what I see in my vision, traveling at a low altitude over a marsh, very fast, like perhaps on a speedboat of some sort. And you're zipping along, or a very low-flying aircraft. You're zipping along above the marsh, and in front of you is the glorious northeaster sunrise. A thin band of yellow. Then a thicker band of beautiful green. Above that, blue. Kind of a light blue. So it's kind of this yellow, and then green, and then light blue, and then above it, the darkness of night. Well, I never seen this except in my mind, but I see it often enough. It's kind of assume it's a real place. But anyway, in this place, if it's real or not, well, it's part of the imaginary territories, the east side. And the east side, well, they don't like to see people in distress. They don't like to see people suffer. They don't like to see people exploited or taken advantage of. So, when it happens, Well, especially to an East Side person who gets exploited or taken advantage of, or maybe even a West Side person, if they're open to being rescued by the East Side, you send out a prayer, you send out a request that the East Side, or God, or Jesus, whoever, we all work on the same team, or they all work on the same team. I guess I say we because I like to think of myself as part of it. Sure, for life is a mission, and the mission is, promoting your imaginary territory. So if you're from the East Side, you promote love and compassion, honesty, and helping out people who are disadvantaged and making sure that they're taken care of. Where the West Side tries to get the most for themselves at the expense of others. So, that's the mission of life, is to kind of emulate your imaginary territory. And perhaps it's more to emulate the East Side imaginary territory. Perhaps that's what we're ultimately evolving towards. And perhaps that's why I traditionally think of it as the largest imaginary territory, the most powerful and with the most influence. Well, if that's really the case, which it probably is, well, then, perhaps there's rescue available to us, especially if we're of the East Side and we're being exploited. Perhaps, like the trauma and psi phenomenon, perhaps when we're traumatized, we could call on the East Side, or Jesus, or God, or whoever, to come rescue us. And sometimes our prayers are answered. You probably remember instances in your own life where your prayers were answered. I can remember when my prayers were answered. And I can remember when things kind of happened. Very unusual events. Like after Tropical Storm Helene, when I first ventured out and I drive up to a creek only 2 blocks from my house. A new creek in the road that wasn't there before. I can't cross it in my Subaru Forester, so I have to turn around. But I go there the next day and I still can't cross it. But across the way, there's a neighbor. There's never a neighbor. I never see people walking around, or very rarely, once every few months or so. But then all of a sudden, there someone is. And they're there and they help me understand what's going on. They explain to me how my neighborhood's cut off. And they explain to me where I can get cell phone reception, critical information, perhaps a rescue of sorts. So there are rescues, and help is on the way. And perhaps it really is, especially now. Well, with Donald Trump being president, and here in 2025 in March, tariffs looming or already imposed, everything seems to be in chaos. With the war with Russia in Ukraine, the Gaza Strip, and much else. Doge reducing our federal government. Well, gee, it all seems ruthless and awful. Well, the way Trump is handling it is ruthless and awful. Trump being the embodiment of deception and greed. The West Side. Well, we need the East Side to rescue us and mitigate the damages that Trump is creating. Perhaps undo them. perhaps getting rid of Trump, perhaps getting rid of the West Side. The East Side needs to dominate for a while. Perhaps now's the time. Is help on the way? Well, we really need to pray for it. But we're all being traumatized by all of this. And trauma brings about psi phenomenon, which might be useful to us, which might help us find a way out of this. And perhaps the East Side imaginary territory will help us too, as well as Jesus Christ and the angels and God, and so on and so on. Sure. So perhaps there is a rescue agent out there somewhere, ready to help us. Perhaps help is on the way. Now, let's continue with My Big Toe by Thomas Campbell. Let's go to page 721. A common sci-fi plot element requires changes in the present and future to follow instantaneously from inadvertent or purposeful changes to the past, usually made by a nefarious or bungling time traveler. The idea that any change affects everything downstream is based on the erroneous assumption of a continuous reality instead of a digital one, and a fundamental misunderstanding of the functional relationships that interconnect the past, present, and future. Fiddling with OS's unactualized or actualized past has no effect on the existing OS data within TBC and no effect on the present choices being made. The one extremely important effect it does have is to provide learning opportunities to individuated units of aware consciousness that result in a decrease of the unit's entropy. Simply running a query that results in a custom build-as-you-go interactive holographic movie output report does not change the data in the database, but it may change you, and you may change future intents and choices that will define future states. Now let's go to page 737. Together, consciousness and the fundamental process evolve an ever-growing, monstrously complex reality system. A system where every part or entity at every level of existence explores its full potential while populating only those states determined by itself, often using criteria germane to the next higher level, to be significant and useful to itself, often for a higher level purpose or activity. Solar systems, galaxies, human bodies, insects, and consciousness all evolve through the same pattern, as does everything, including AUM. Why is that simple consistency not surprising? Now, let's go to page 744. Progress is measured only by results. Clear, obvious results. There are no quality points given for good effort or nice try, or for believing or not believing anything. You are in charge of your opportunities. Responsible adult individuated consciousness. You cannot bribe, cheat, fake out, or hustle the system. There is no spiritual welfare system. There are no shortcuts. You have to do it 100% by yourself and your friends, connections, and cash cannot help you. Excuses earn zero credit irrespective of how well justified they are. Only results earn credit. On the other hand, there is no practical time limit. You can take as long as you want or need to. There is generally no such thing as absolute failure. Failure is relative and simply equates to a lack of progress. There are no exits, no escapes, no way out or around, except through personal growth. Now, let's go to page 756 of My Big Toe by Thomas Campbell. Personal spiritual progress does not require disengagement. It does not require a high and lofty demeanor or a serious superior than to thou attitude. Clearly, those attributes indicate a lack of spiritual progress, a deficiency of consciousness quality. Unfortunately, people have a natural tendency to place those they think know more than they do on a pedestal and denigrate their own worth or progress by comparison. This is a belief trap that makes progress much less likely. You will evolve more quickly by tossing out the great guru and seriously working on your own than by hanging out with the great guru in lieu of doing serious work on your own. Quality of consciousness is, for the most part, not gained through association or by osmosis. Now, let's go to page 759. Whether or not your big toe is correct or flawed, diminutive or great, is also not important as long as it is moving you in the right general direction. Because an individual's big toe must be perpetually in a state of growth, improvement, and evolution, the motion part is easy. Maintaining your heading in the correct general direction is also easy for committed, honest pudding tasters. If you start growing a big toe and continually progress it in the right direction, you will eventually end up with the big toe. That is why it is more important to get serious and get going than it is to make sure you are doing it absolutely right. From the perspective of PMR, the process of reducing entropy within your consciousness has many valid approaches. It is a naturally convergent process that will take you from wherever you are to where you need to be. Regardless of what direction you initially take, if you are serious and persistent, you will eventually end up with the same result. Some paths are simply more or less efficient, depending on the individual. Now, let's go to page 783 and continuing on to page 784 of My Big Toe by Thomas Campbell. Physicist Dr. Edward Fredkin of MIT, Boston University, and Carnegie Mellon finally made the digital connection. In 1992, Dr. Fredkin published two papers, A New Cosmology and Finite Nature. In these formal scientific papers, presented within traditional scientific forums, Dr. Fredkin developed rationale supporting both quantized space and quantized time, along with a description of reality as fundamentally digital. The science of information theory and mathematics led him to postulate an ultimate computer as the basis of a digital reality that computes our physical existence. If space and time and matter and energy are all a consequence of the informational processes running on the ultimate computer, then everything in our universe is represented by that informational process. The place where the computer is, the engine that runs that process, we choose to call other. Where did other come from? This question is actually quite easy to fence with. The nature of systems of laws that can support computation is very much broader than the nature of systems that are limited to the physics of our universe. In other words, many of the properties of our world that are necessary for our world to take the form it has are not necessary for other kinds of worlds that can support universal computation. Universal computation, the kind that can simulate other general purpose computers, is even a property of all ordinary commercial computers. There is no need for a space with 3 dimensions. Computation can do just fine in spaces of any number of dimensions. The space does not have to be locally connected like our world is. Computation does not require conversation laws or computation does not require conservation laws or symmetries. A world that supports computation does not have time as we know it. There is no need for beginnings or endings. Computation is comparable within worlds where something can come from nothing, where resources are finite, infinite, or variable. Now, let's go to page 787. Continuing on to page 788. Following the herd, no matter which way it is going, inevitably leads to stasis and dysfunction. Following the herd or conceptual center allows you to trade the opportunity for personal progress and growth for an easy and safe, no-brainer glide through existence. Unfortunately, procrastination and immediate gratification team up to produce the worst possible long-term strategy for consciousness evolution. The herd appears to validate each member with its mutual support mantra of I'm okay, you're okay, we are all okay as long as we stick together. Fear and ego provide the herd's cohesive forces. Your individual consciousness is a personal thing, not a group thing. If you have the courage to break loose from the herd, don't worry, the larger world is not nearly as scary as it looks. Gather strength and resolve from the fact that, as a solitary seeker, you are following the path of all innovators, discoverers, and creators. Only as an individual do you have the potential to make a significant difference where it counts the most. Now, let's go to page 793 of My Big Toe by Thomas Campbell. Thus, My Big Toe, obviously a work of metaphysics and philosophy, is by virtue of its methodology, rational process, logic, and careful experimentation, also a work of science. It is in a similar category, reality models, with the atomic shell model, string theory, or any other scientific model for that matter, only much larger in its scope. The data needed to validate this model must come from science, philosophy, and most importantly, from your objectively evaluated subjective experience. Now, let's go to page 809. Scientific methodology is not to be abandoned to superstition. In fact, it is exactly the opposite. Scientific methodology needs to rise above the superstition and belief that now cripples its vision in order to separate truth from fiction at a higher level of rational understanding. Personal explorations of consciousness into PMR are not about otherwise intelligent people, including scientists, becoming mushheads in PMR. It is more about self-limited PMR boneheads becoming scientists at the next higher level of causality. Now, let's go to page 810 of My Big Toe by Thomas Campbell. Your intent reflects the quality of your being and drives your choices. It is learning and personal growth that eventually enable you to make the right choices for the right reasons. Naturally,
Casey Waters Show. Producer, Casey Waters. Graphic editing, Judson Laird. Please note our new email address, caseywaters2@caseywaters.com.